The morning sky was washed in a pale gold hue, the kind that feels calm but hides something uneasy underneath. Margaret sat quietly in the passenger seat, her hands resting on her worn leather purse. Her son Ethan was driving, focused, distant, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. They'd been on the road for nearly an hour, but neither had spoken much. The silence between them was thick, like the fog that trailed the car through the countryside. Margaret tried to break it once, mentioning how lovely the weather was, but Ethan only nodded without looking at her. Margaret's heart sank a little. He used to talk to her all the time, about work, about his wife Claire, about their daughter Lily. Lately he barely called. And when he did, there was always a kind of rush in his voice, like he couldn't wait to hang up. "Where exactly are we going, dear?" she finally asked, her voice soft but careful. Ethan smiled weakly. "It's a surprise, Mom. You'll see." She smiled back, though a little uncertainly. He used to call her Mama. Now it was just Mom. A small difference, but it stung. The car turned off the main highway and followed a narrow road lined with tall oaks. Margaret recognized nothing about the area. The houses grew fewer, the air quieter. She watched a lone bird dart across the sky and felt something, an ache she couldn't name. When Ethan finally stopped the car, it was in front of a large, white-bricked building with wide glass doors and a sign that read, "Willow Haven Residence." Margaret frowned, trying to read it again. The words felt heavy, unfamiliar. "Ethan, what is this place?" He cleared his throat and avoided her gaze. It's a new place, Mom. A good one. They'll take care of you here. You'll have people your age, nurses, activities." Her smile faltered. "Take care of me? Ethan, I don't need—" "Please, Mom." His voice cracked slightly. "It's for your own good. Claire and I talked about this for weeks. You'll be happier here." The air inside the car grew still. Margaret's fingers trembled as she reached for the door handle. She didn't understand what hurt more, the decision, or the way he couldn't even look at her when he said it. As she stepped out, the sound of the car engine lingered behind her. She turned, hoping he'd say something, anything. But Ethan was already driving away. Margaret stood frozen on the sidewalk, clutching her purse. The wind carried the faint sound of laughter from inside the building. Her eyes welled up, and she whispered to herself, "So this is how it begins." That night, Margaret discovers something inside the residence that makes her realize she might not be the only one who was left behind. A nurse with a bright smile met Margaret at the entrance. Her name tag read, Lena. She was young, too young, Margaret thought, to understand what it means to be left somewhere you didn't choose. "Welcome to Willow Haven. Mrs. Green," she said kindly, taking the small suitcase from Margaret's hand. "You'll love it here. Everyone's very friendly." Margaret nodded politely, her voice caught somewhere in her throat. She followed Lena through a long hallway filled with soft music and the faint smell of lavender. Paintings of sunlit gardens lined the walls, but something about them felt off, too perfect, like happiness painted over silence. Her room was small but clean, cream-colored walls, a single bed, a window that overlooked a garden she could barely see through the glass. On the bedside table sat a little card that read, "Welcome home, Margaret." The words twisted something inside her. Home. Lena placed her suitcase by the bed and said, "Dinner's at 6. You'll meet some of the other residents then." When she left, the room fell silent again. Margaret sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the faint ticking of a clock somewhere down the hall. She opened her suitcase, neatly packed clothes, a framed photo of Ethan and Lily, and the small porcelain angel her late husband had given her. She held the photo for a long time. Ethan looked so young in it, smiling at her from years ago when he still needed her. Hours passed before she decided to go for a walk. The corridors were dimly lit, the air heavy with disinfectant and loneliness. She passed a door slightly ajar and heard a soft voice humming inside. Peeking in, she saw an old man sitting by the window, talking to a photograph in his hands. "Been waiting all day for her to call," he murmured. "But she never does anymore." Margaret froze. The ache in his tone mirrored her own heart. She stepped back quietly, not wanting to intrude, but his words stayed with her. When she returned to her room, she found something strange. Her photo, the one of Ethan and Lily, was gone. The suitcase was still there, but the frame had disappeared. She checked the floor, under the bed, even the small nightstand drawer. Nothing. And then she heard it, a faint knock at her door. "Mrs. Green," came a voice from outside. "It's dinner time. You wouldn't want to miss tonight's surprise, would you?" Margaret's pulse quickened. Surprise? She stood still, her hand hovering over the doorknob. That night, Margaret discovers the surprise isn't what it seems. And the truth about Willow Haven begins to surface in the most unsettling way. The dining hall glowed with warm light, but to Margaret, it felt strangely hollow, like a stage set for a play where everyone already knew their lines except her. Long tables stretched across the room, filled with people her age, all smiling politely, their laughter just a bit too measured. A nurse guided her to a seat near the end of the table. "Here you go, Mrs. Green. You can sit beside Mr. Adler. He's been here for a while," she said cheerfully before walking off. Mr. Adler, a thin man with kind eyes and a trembling hand, nodded to her. "First day, huh?" "Yes," Margaret replied softly. "It's different," he chuckled lightly. "You'll get used to it. Or at least, that's what they tell us." Before Margaret could ask what he meant, the doors opened, and the director of the residence entered. A tall woman in a gray suit, sharp eyes behind her glasses. Her name tag read, Ms. Rowan, Administrator. "Good evening, everyone," she said in a rehearsed, cheerful tone. "We have a few new faces tonight. Let's welcome Mrs. Margaret Green." Everyone clapped politely, their smiles frozen in place. Margaret forced a small wave, feeling the weight of all those eyes on her. Then the surprise was brought out, a cake. White frosting, pink flowers, and a little candle flickering on top. "For our new residents," Ms. Rowan announced. "A sweet start to a new chapter." But as the lights dimmed for the candle ceremony, Margaret noticed something peculiar. One of the residents, an old woman with silver hair sitting across from her, was staring blankly ahead, not clapping, not moving. A nurse leaned close and whispered something to her, but the woman didn't respond. The others kept smiling, pretending not to notice. Margaret's stomach tightened. The laughter felt louder now, forced, echoing unnaturally through the room. After dinner, as the residents filed out, Mr. Adler leaned closer and whispered, "If you can, don't drink the tea. Just trust me on that." She froze. "Why?" He gave a sad smile. "You'll see." Margaret pretended to sip from her cup, then quietly set it aside. When she returned to her room later, she found the missing photo frame placed neatly on her pillow. The glass was cracked, and someone had written on the back in messy, trembling handwriting, "Not safe here. Watch the nurses." Her breath caught in her throat. She turned toward the hallway, where shadows stretched long across the floor. Somewhere in the distance, a door clicked shut. She wasn't alone. The next morning, Margaret decides to uncover who left the message. But what she finds in the common room reveals that Willow Haven's secrets run far deeper than she imagined. Margaret didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the floor, every hum of the fluorescent lights made her flinch. She sat upright in bed, the cracked photo frame resting on her lap, her thoughts running in circles. Who could have written that message? Mr. Adler? That silent woman from dinner? Or was someone trying to frighten her into leaving? By morning, the hallway was alive with soft chatter and the faint smell of oatmeal. Margaret stepped out cautiously, clutching her cardigan close. A nurse passed her with a polite smile, clipboard in hand, but something about the woman's eyes felt empty. In the common room, a group of residents were gathered around an old piano, singing along to a tune from the 1960s. Margaret spotted Mr. Adler sitting alone near the window. His cup of tea sat untouched. She walked up to him. "Did you leave something in my room?" she whispered. He didn't look at her. "You found it then?" "Yes. What does it mean, not safe here? Who should I watch?" Mr. Adler's eyes darted toward the nurse's station. "Keep your voice down. They listen to everything." Margaret frowned. "Who?" "The staff. Especially Ms. Rowan. This place. It isn't what they say it is." Before she could ask more, a nurse appeared beside them with a too bright smile. "Mrs. Green, you're due for your morning medication." Margaret forced a polite grin. "Oh, I'll take it in a moment, dear." The nurse's smile didn't waver, but her tone cooled. "Now please, doctor's orders." Margaret took the small paper cup and pretended to swallow the pills. As soon as the nurse turned away, she slipped them into her pocket. Mr. Adler nodded approvingly. "Good. Keep doing that." Her heart pounded. Why? He leaned closer, his whisper trembling. They're not just sedatives. They make you forget. Piece by piece, days vanish. Memories fade. That's how they keep everyone calm. Margaret's breath caught. That can't be true. Mr. Adler's expression softened with pity. How long do you think I've been here, Mrs. Green? Months, maybe? He shook his head slowly. 3 years. At least that's what they told me. But I only remember the last 6 days. The piano stopped. The laughter faded. Margaret felt the air around her tighten, like the walls themselves were listening. Suddenly, the intercom crackled to life. Mrs. Green. Ms. Rowan's voice echoed through the hall, cold and calm. Please come to the office. We need to discuss your medication compliance. Margaret froze. How did they know? Mr. Adler gave her a grave look. They always know. In Ms. Rowan's office, Margaret learns a chilling truth about the facility's treatment plan and realizes escaping Willow Haven might not be as simple as walking out the door. Margaret's footsteps echoed down the long hallway as she followed the nurse toward Ms. Rowan's office. Every sound seemed louder, the hum of the lights, the squeak of the nurse's shoes, the faint murmur of voices behind closed doors. When they arrived, Ms. Rowan was waiting behind her polished wooden desk, her expression calm but sharp. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, striping her face with shadow. Please sit down, Mrs. Green, she said smoothly. I've noticed some irregularities with your medication schedule. Margaret forced a gentle smile as she sat. I must have just forgotten, dear. First day nerves, you know. Ms. Rowan's lips curved slightly. Understandable. But here at Willow Haven, we take consistency very seriously. Stability is key to recovery. Recovery from what? Margaret asked quietly. The administrator's gaze flicked up from her clipboard. Your condition, of course. Your son's file mentioned mild cognitive decline. We're here to ensure you remain safe and compliant. Margaret's chest tightened. I don't recall agreeing to that kind of treatment. Ms. Rowan folded her hands. Your son did. Legally, he's your primary contact. He made the decision for your well-being. Margaret's heart sank. Ethan. She tried to hide the tremor in her voice. I see. Ms. Rowan leaned forward, her tone softening but her eyes cold. I know this adjustment is difficult, but once you settle in, you'll feel more at peace. We all do eventually. Margaret forced a polite nod. Thank you. I'll remember that. When she left the office, the hallway felt different, narrower somehow, as if the building itself were closing in. She clutched her cardigan tighter and walked quickly toward her room. But as she passed the nurse's station, she noticed something strange. A large binder lay open on the counter, filled with names and medical notes. Her eyes scanned the list and froze. Adler, Benjamin, transferred. Cognitive reset, incomplete. Memory stabilization, ongoing. Her breath caught. Cognitive reset? Before she could read more, a nurse appeared and closed the binder with a smile too quick to be natural. Can I help you, Mrs. Green? No, Margaret murmured. Just passing by. She hurried back to her room, her mind spinning. She pulled out the pills she'd hidden earlier and stared at them under the light. They weren't ordinary sedatives. The capsules were faintly tinted blue, like the ones she remembered from her late husband's hospital days. Strong, disorienting, meant to suppress thought. Her hands trembled. That evening, she met Mr. Adler again in the corridor. His eyes looked cloudier than before. Did they speak to you? He asked weakly. Yes, she whispered. And I think you're right. They're doing something to us. He leaned in close, voice cracking. Then we need to get out before we forget why. As Margaret and Mr. Adler plan their escape, a shocking discovery in the basement of Willow Haven reveals the horrifying reason no one ever truly leaves the residence. The night air in Willow Haven felt colder than usual. The lights dimmed early, and the corridors emptied one by one until only silence remained. Margaret sat by her window, watching the faint glow of the moon stretch across the garden. Somewhere below, she could hear the low rumble of machinery, a sound she hadn't noticed before. Mr. Adler had told her to meet him after lights out, near the laundry hall. That's where he said the truth was buried. When the clock struck 10, Margaret slipped on her slippers and crept out. Her heart pounded so loudly she was sure someone would hear it. The hallways looked longer at night, the shadows deeper. Every distant click or hum made her flinch. She reached the laundry hall, a small, sterile room filled with the faint scent of bleach. Mr. Adler was already there, waiting by a half-open door that led to the maintenance stairs. You came? He whispered. Of course, she said. You said there's something I need to see. He nodded and led her down the narrow staircase. The air grew colder, damper. The hum of machinery grew louder with every step. When they reached the bottom, Margaret saw a heavy metal door marked Authorized Personnel Only. Mr. Adler hesitated. They keep it locked most nights, he murmured, pulling out a small key. I found this weeks ago. The lock clicked open. Inside was a long, dimly lit corridor lined with storage rooms. But what caught Margaret's eye was the frosted glass window at the far end. Behind it, she could see faint, shifting silhouettes. They approached slowly. Through the window, she saw rows of hospital beds, each occupied by someone motionless, hooked up to machines that pulsed with soft blue light. Oh my God. She breathed. Mr. Adler's hands trembled as he whispered, Those are the ones who don't adjust. They say it's therapy, but it's not. It's erasure. Margaret stared in horror. One of the beds bore a nameplate, Harriet L., Memory Program Stage 3. Memory Program, she repeated. They're experimenting on people. Suddenly, the door behind them slammed shut. The lights flickered. A voice echoed through a hidden speaker, calm, clinical, unmistakable. Mrs. Green. Mr. Adler, you were not authorized to access this area. Ms. Rowan's voice. Margaret's chest tightened. She's watching us. The hallway lights turned red, bathing everything in a sick glow. Mr. Adler grabbed her hand. We have to move, now. They ran, the echo of alarms chasing them through the corridor. But just before they reached the stairs, a figure stepped out from the shadows. Lena, the young nurse. Her expression was blank, her voice robotic. Please return to your rooms. Non-compliance will result in intervention. Cornered and desperate, Margaret realizes the only way to escape isn't through the doors, but through the memories Willow Haven has been trying to erase. Margaret froze, her heart hammering in her chest. Lena's eyes looked empty, glassy, as though the girl had been hollowed out. Mr. Adler stepped forward cautiously. Lena, he said softly. You don't have to do this. The young nurse blinked once, her hand twitching toward a small device on her belt. Return to your rooms. You are disrupting therapy protocols. Margaret glanced around. There was nowhere to run. The stairway behind, then was sealed by a metal gate that had slid down from above. Then she noticed something odd. The red emergency light, flickering on the far wall, illuminated a narrow service tunnel partially hidden behind a stack of supply crates. Over there, she whispered. Mr. Adler didn't hesitate. Together they darted toward the tunnel as Lena shouted behind them. A blaring alarm filled the basement. They crawled through the narrow passage, the walls damp and cold against their palms. The tunnel eventually opened into a small dark chamber filled with old medical equipment covered in dust. The air was thick with mildew and silence. In the corner stood a single door marked Archive Room. Margaret exchanged a look with Mr. Adler, then slowly turned the handle. Inside, rows of filing cabinets lined the walls. Each drawer was labeled with names, hundreds of them. Some had tags marked inactive, others erased. Margaret's trembling fingers slid open one drawer. Her breath caught when she saw the first folder. Green, Margaret. Inside were pages filled with charts, medication logs, and notes written in cold, clinical handwriting. One line was underlined in red. Subject beginning to question environment. Administer increased dosage. Her eyes filled with tears. They planned it all, she whispered. They were going to take my memories too. Mr. Adler was flipping through his own file. His voice cracked. They told me my daughter stopped visiting years ago. But this says she called every week. They never told me. Margaret placed a hand on his shoulder. They wanted you to forget, Ben. He nodded weakly. Then we have to make them remember. Suddenly, the lights in the room flickered again, followed by the distant sound of footsteps echoing through the tunnel. They're coming, Margaret said. She quickly tore the photo of Ethan and Lily from her pocket and stared at it. If they erase me, I need to hold on to this, to who I am. Ben grabbed her hand. Then we fight. The footsteps grew louder. The door rattled. Margaret looked around desperately and saw a computer terminal glowing faintly in the corner, still powered. She turned to Ben. Maybe the way out isn't through the door. As alarms blare and security closes in, Margaret uses the archive computer to uncover Willow Haven's darkest secret, one that could destroy the entire facility from within. The old computer flickered to life, its screen casting a cold blue glow across the room. Dust floated through the light as Margaret frantically clicked through files, her hands trembling. "Come on," she whispered. "There has to be something here." Mr. Adler stood by the door, listening to the approaching footsteps. The metallic clangs grew louder. Guards or nurses, it didn't matter. They were coming, on the screen. A folder caught Margaret's eye. Project Willow. She opened it. Lines of text filled the monitor. Clinical reports, progress logs, and one chilling header. Objective: induce controlled memory regression in elderly patients to reduce emotional instability and financial liability. Testing to continue until subjects display full compliance or cognitive reset. Margaret's stomach turned. "They're experimenting on us," she breathed. "Turning people into shells so they can control them." Mr. Adler's voice cracked. "Then we have to stop them." Margaret nodded, scrolling further. Another document appeared. Memory Sync Protocol. Administrator access only. It was a live control system showing every patient's neural pattern connected to the facility's central unit. Her eyes widened. "If we shut this down, everyone wakes up." Before she could think twice, she selected System Override. A warning flashed, unauthorized access detected. "Security lockdown imminent." "Do it," Adler urged. She slammed the enter key. The screen turned red. An alarm blared through the halls. The lights flickered violently. Somewhere above them, doors began unlocking. The patients, those who could still move, started wandering out of their rooms, dazed but awake for the first time in years. Margaret turned to Adler, a mix of fear and hope in her eyes. "It's working." Then came the voice over the intercom, calm, eerily collected. "Mrs. Green, you've made a terrible mistake." It was Ms. Rowan. "You think you're saving them? But without our care, their memories will collapse completely. You're condemning them to chaos." Margaret clenched her fists. Better chaos than being erased. She ripped the power cord from the wall. The screen went dark. The building trembled as backup generators failed. Lights exploded one by one, plunging the room into near darkness. "Come on," Adler shouted, grabbing her arm. They ran through the tunnel as the alarms faded into silence. Somewhere behind them, a door burst open. Lena's voice shouting orders, the sound of boots on tile. Margaret stumbled up the stairs, out into the cold night air. The stars above felt impossibly bright. For the first time since arriving, she could breathe. She turned to Ben, tears in her eyes. "We did it," he smiled faintly. "Did we?" Behind them, Willow Haven's lights flickered one last time, and then went completely dark. As dawn breaks, Margaret and Ben make their way down the empty road, but when a police car approaches, Margaret realizes the driver looks strangely familiar and calls her by a name she doesn't remember anymore. The first light of dawn spilled across the fields, brushing the horizon in gold and pink. Margaret walked slowly along the deserted road, her shoes soaked from the dew-covered grass. Beside her, Ben limped slightly, breathing hard but smiling faintly. They had escaped. At least, that's what they wanted to believe. The trees on either side of the road swayed gently in the morning wind. For the first time in what felt like forever, Margaret could smell freedom, crisp air, soil, and the faint scent of rain. Yet beneath it all, something inside her still trembled. "How far do you think the next town is?" Ben asked, his voice rough. "I don't know," she replied softly, "but I'm not stopping until I find a phone. And call my son." Ben chuckled quietly. "You still trust him after what he did?" Margaret hesitated. "He's still my boy. Maybe he thought he was doing the right thing. Maybe we all do until it's too late." The sound of an approaching engine broke the silence. A car was coming down the road, a dark sedan with flashing blue lights. Margaret's heart skipped. "Police," she whispered. "Maybe they can help us." The car slowed and stopped beside them. The driver stepped out, a tall officer with kind eyes and a familiar face. He smiled as if he'd been expecting them. "Mrs. Green," he said gently, "we've been looking for you." Margaret blinked. You know me." "Of course," he said. "We received a call from Willow Haven. They said you wandered off during your therapy session. You must be frightened. Why don't you let us take you back?" Her chest tightened. "Back?" The officer nodded patiently. "To the residence. You belong there, remember?" Ben stepped forward, shaking his head. "No, we're not going anywhere near that place again. The officer's calm expression didn't change. Sir, please step aside. Mrs. Green's family signed consent for continuous care. Margaret's hands began to shake. No, she whispered. You're lying, he tilted his head. Am I? Then she saw it, the glint of a small badge on his uniform. Not a police insignia, but the silver emblem of Willow Haven. Her blood ran cold. Before she could react, Ben grabbed her arm and shouted, "Run!" They bolted toward the trees. Branches whipped against their faces as they pushed through the woods, the sound of footsteps and distant shouting behind them. Finally, they stopped near an old wooden bridge crossing a stream. Margaret leaned against the railing, gasping for breath. Ben looked at her, eyes wide. What do we do now? Margaret stared at the rising sun, its light washing over her tired face. We remember, she said softly. No matter what they try to take, we remember who we are. From somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, but this time, Margaret didn't flinch. She turned to Ben with a faint, defiant smile. Let them come. Did you like my story? If you listened till the end, drop a 1 in the comments. If you enjoyed it, you can support me by liking the video and subscribe. I've got lots of other life stories like this on my channel. Thanks for being here. See you in the next story.